Alright, so UFC Rio just took place this past weekend, and honestly, I thought it was a fantastic card. But something that stuck with me ever since the event ended was a moment of unprofessionalism out of Michael Bisping directed towards John Gooden. Mind you, Mike has shown love on this channel before, but you know what, I'm not here to make friends and I gotta keep it real. He was really out of line here, and John didn't deserve Bisping's attitude. I have quite a bit to say about Mike's commentary style, and I'd also like to talk about my general thoughts on UFC commentary as a whole. Apart from that, I want to give you guys my thoughts on Charles Oliveira, as well as some of the other fights on the card, and yeah, in this video I'm gonna be talking about all this and more. So let me set the stage really quickly. In the first round of Vicente Luque versus Joel Alvarez, Luque fell to his knees right after he thought he got poked in the eye. However, it quickly became clear that it was in fact not an eye poke, but instead a perfectly legal strike, which then led to this.
They said he's good. No. I mean, you're supposed to get 5 minutes.
Time. No, but he's saying no because
no.
It's illegal. It is a legal strike.
Well, correct. You're right. It was a legal shot.
So he doesn't get the 5 minutes. But he waived the fight.
Yeah, but to your point, he waved. It's a legal strike, and he went down.
No, but this is.
So now the clock's running.
This shouldn't happen.
It shouldn't happen.
This shouldn't happen. They should restart the fights. If Luque wants to get, they should restart the fights.
I disagree. It was a legal strike.
No, that's what I'm saying. It was a legal strike.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. But then there's no official timeout on a legal strike.
Now, this really wasn't too bad. I do think that you can start to tell that Mike started to get a little irritated towards the end, but I don't think that anything got too crazy by this point. Regardless, I would like to point out Mike's complete and utter lack of wanting to understand what John was trying to say. First off, Mike keeps talking about how Vicente should be getting a 5-minute break even after the strike was deemed legal, which is absolutely not the case. And then he keeps repeating how the fight should be called off because Vicente dropped to his knees, but I don't think that this is true either. Like, sure, Vicente did have a pretty dramatic reaction to what he thought was an eye poke, but more importantly, the ref also thought that this was an eye poke. Thus, when it became known that it was a fair shot, the fight should have been immediately resumed. This is where I need to call out the poor officiating that took place, which definitely added to the confusion, and I'd also like to mention that I think it's insane that we're 30 years into the UFC and refs are still making these basic mistakes when calling fights. Even after everybody learned it was a legal shot, this dummy still brought in the ringside doctor to check out Vicente. This guy's a moron. But still, this doesn't change the fact that Mike, who's a professional commentator and former UFC champion, doesn't fully understand the rules of the sport that he's dedicated his life to. Gooden even doubles down that given the circumstances, the fight should be resumed, and Mike flat out says that he disagrees.
What was thought to be an eye poke, which wasn't, the referee stopped it thinking that it was an eye poke. He motioned to wave off the fight, but then brought the doctor in. When the replay said that it was a legal strike, he should never have brought the doctor in. You shouldn't wave it off at that point. You should then realise it was a legal strike and restart the fight, unless Luque said he didn't want to take part. That was a real hash of things right there. I am, however, glad that we are back to action.
Well, so am I, but the reality is that Alvarez has been robbed of a victory because it was a fair blow. It sat him down on the canvas. He went down to his knees.
Well, he did.
Let me speak. He dropped him down to the floor.
He backed off, though, didn't he?
Yeah, so what? Because he went down. It was a legal blow.
Oh, so, it was definitely a legal blow.
Yeah, so therefore, he's been robbed of a victory. Regardless, I'm a massive fan of Vicente Luque.
Yeah.
But that should have been stopped, and it should have been a victory for Joel Alvarez, regardless.
I think the referee was giving, because he thought it was the eye poke.
I know, John. I'm well aware of that.
Alvarez wasn't robbed of anything. The ref also thought it was an eye poke. If the ref saw that it was a legal shot when it happened, then he would have told Luque to keep fighting, and if he then wasn't able to defend himself, then the fight would have been stopped. Honestly, this really isn't that hard of a situation to break down. We have seen situations like this in the past. I'm pretty surprised that Mike can't wrap his head around why the fight was resumed. The fucking irony of Mike being so confidently wrong in this situation is kinda hilarious to me, but what isn't funny is him pulling that attitude with Gooden, who was just trying to explain the reality of the situation. Let me speak. Nah, dog, you gotta listen. He's right. You're wrong. This is one of those times where Mike is only seeing half the picture because his ego and hubris aren't allowing him to see the very obvious nuance that happened right in front of his eye. Also, him saying, I'm well aware at the end is rich. Like, obviously you're not. Let's draw a comparison to Gegard Mousasi versus Chris Weidman. When they fought back in 2017, Mousasi ended up throwing a knee to the head when it seemed like Weidman had both his hands on the ground, which back then was illegal. Chris immediately fell to the ground and told the ref that he was unable to continue fighting, and at the time, a lot of us thought the fight was going to end with Gegard of being disqualified. However, as it turns out, the knee was actually completely legal because Mousasi lifted Weidman's hands off the ground just before throwing the knee. And because Chris had already told the ref that he was unable to continue, and because the strike was totally legal, the fight was called off and Mousasi was the winner. The very distinct differentiation between this fight and Vicente Luque here is that Luque never expressed he wasn't able to continue fighting. He wasn't trying to bait a disqualification, he just wanted time to recover from what he thought was an eye poke, which is pretty standard affair. I mean, at worst, he was probably trying to get the ref to give Alvarez a hard warning or maybe even a point deduction, but I think that's fair game. But again, at no point did Luque say he couldn't fight anymore. Yeah, this was just an awkward and unprofessional moment out of Mike, who's really been tallying up some awkward and unprofessional moments throughout his time as a commentator. Back in May, while commentating for Contender Series, he called a guy by an incorrect name for the entirety of the fight and he got roasted for it by fans. And then a month before that, he was criticized for being extremely biased in favor of Lerone Murphy when he fought Josh Emmett.
Anyway, there's always people that complain, and when Lerone Murphy fought Josh Emmett, there was like 5 or 6 people that said, oh, Bisping's the worst commentator of all time. Anytime I commentate an English guy against an American, all of a sudden I'm super biased. And I feel I actually go the other way because I'm aware of that criticism and I want to make sure I'm very even. But then some journalists, for bloody elbow, wrote an article using that as the headline.
And of course, when you take into account this past Saturday's situation, then it's been 3 really poor examples of commentating from this guy in the past 6 months, which isn't great. Look, I know that a lot of UFC fans out there are very anti-commentary, and there's a lot of hardcore fans who watch events with the sound turned off because they really hate listening to the commentators. Personally, I'm not one of those guys because I think that we have enough good commentators to justify listening to. John Anik, Brendan Fitzgerald, and Paul Felder are absolutely incredible at what they do, and even though I think there's a drop-off in quality after that, for the most part, I'm pretty satisfied with the performances from the other commentators. And obviously, this is all subjective, but I've definitely felt like Michael Bisping has been the weakest out of the bunch lately. Sure, mistakes happen, especially in a profession like fight commentary, so I'm not going to nitpick all the times that Mike has said something inaccurate, but this guy's ego in the commentary booth is out of control. I used to get annoyed by Dominic Cruz for this, but I feel like Dom's chilled out recently, but unfortunately, I can't say the same about Bisping. Mike just likes to argue, and every time he gets into one during a broadcast, it never actually feels like he's trying to rationalize through a situation as much as it feels like him talking down to whoever he's arguing with. If I had a nickel for every time I've heard him explain why his position on something is correct just because he was a former champion, then I would have many nickels. These guys are there to provide real-time analysis, but more importantly, they're supposed to be the entertaining guys on the desk, and the first rule about entertainment is to not make things awkward. And when it comes to Mike, he lets his insatiable desire to appear like he's right get in the way of making the viewing experience enjoyable way too often. And although Dominic Cruz has been guilty of this as well, Mike doesn't bring that same level of technical analysis that a lot of people want to hear, so it kind of just leaves Mike in this weird spot of just not having any real strengths as a commentator. Like, he's not as analytical as Dominic Cruz, he doesn't have DC's natural chemistry, and he's not well-rounded like Paul Felder. He's kind of just there because he's a company man and Dana likes him, but when compared to his peers, there's not really that much of a comparison. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Mike's terrible necessarily, because I do think that he has pretty good presence on the mic, but then again, so do all of the other commentators. He just doesn't do anything better than any of them, and the only times that he's been memorable is when he's bickering back and forth with his coworkers. And I'm not gonna sit here and say that I want to see the guy get fired or anything, but if the UFC wanted to downsize their commentary team, then I know who should be cut first. Okay, let's talk about some of the fights from this past Saturday, starting with the main event. Charles Oliveira clearly still belongs at the top of the division, and he's still absolutely one of my favorite fighters in the game right now. Gamrot is a really good fighter, and this is the first time in his entire career where he got finished, and I wouldn't really say that it was all that hard of a fight for Oliveira. And for what it's worth, he made fighting Gamrot look way easier than Arman Sarukian ever did. Also, it's fucking insane to me that there were really fans out there saying that Charles was ducking Gamrot. Do you even know who this guy is? Charles quite literally had the longest road to a title shot in UFC history. He fought damn near everybody in the division by the time he became champion. A lot of valid criticisms can be made about the way that he fights, but something that can't be said about Charles is that he's not down to fight anybody. And seeing as Arman is fighting Dan Hooker soon, I'd like to see Charles fight whoever wins. I felt pretty confident that Davison Figueiredo was going to be too much for Montel Jackson, but I thought that Montel was going to put up at least a decent fight. I don't remember the last time I've seen a guy fight so scared of being taken down, but Jackson was so preoccupied with staying off the mat that he forgot how to throw punches. I think Figgy's kind of in a weird spot in the division right now, and I think that pairing him up with Sean O'Malley, who's also in a weird spot in the division right now, might be a good idea. When it comes to Vicente Luque, officiating and commentary nonsense aside, this guy really needs to retire. During his prime, Luque was on the short list of BMF contenders, but it's pretty clear that he's only fighting to collect a check nowadays. And I don't know if it's just him getting older or if it's mixed with the brain injury he went through after getting knocked out by Jeff Neal, but he's gone from being one of the most violent guys in the entire UFC to a guy that looks like he's afraid of getting hit. Obviously, there's no shame in getting older because Father Time remains undefeated. Nonetheless, I for sure think it's time for Vicente to hang up the gloves. Anyways, that's the video for today. Definitely let me know what you think about Michael Bisping as a commentator. fighter? Do you think he was in the right this past Saturday, and how would you rank him amongst the current commentators? As always, if you like the video, then like the video, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.
But I'm probably as biased as the judges. Certainly not as biased as Michael Bisping, who shouldn't have been nowhere near a microphone during that fight. Yeah, sucks.
Is that something the UFC needs to look at, like having guys who are friends of the people fighting not commentate?
It's not my call. I just thought it was very unprofessional.
Justin, just